Welcome to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.
Is the most controversial film in the history of UFO research real? If it were real, would people take it in stride or would human society collapse? Who is Ray Santilli?
Hello, and welcome to the 832nd edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. I am Ben, and those high-flying questions came from my co-host, partner in the paranormal adventures, and Dad, Paul. Today, we bring you a new view of a well-known subject in the UFO field, and we welcome your calls today. The number is 401-766-1240. That's from anywhere, or you can email Paul at behindtheparanormal.com, or you can contact us via Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
Joining us via Skype from the UK today is researcher, author, and publisher Philip Mantle. Philip is the former Director of Investigations for the British UFO Research Association, is the Mutual UFO Network's representative for England, and is an honorary member of the Research Institute on Anomalous Phenomena in the Ukraine. He is an international lecturer on the subject of UFOs and has also worked for a variety of television and radio companies around the world. This is Philip's first appearance on the show in over 9 years. As I say, that's not going to happen again. We're going to get him on more frequently than that. So, Philip Mantle, welcome back to Behind the Paranormal.
Yeah, good day, gentlemen. Nice to speak to you.
Oh, very good. Okay, we're getting your video now. That's good. For anyone who is not listening to the show, or I should say is not watching the show on a device that allows you to receive the video feed, you can check the talking points page for this show at behindtheparanormal.com. Just go to upcoming shows. This is the first one listed, and there is a link for the talking points. You can be able to see the photographs and pictures we'll be talking about.
Alrighty, so Philip, you're just so we're just going to let you take the show, and you know we'll add questions as we go along. So please tell us the story of the alien autopsy film and any new information that you have learned.
Yeah, I mean it's believe it or not, gentlemen, this year is the 25th anniversary of the alien autopsy film. It was first shown on television back in 1995. So. Because of that and other things that, there has been renewed interest in it. But my connection with it goes all the way back to 1993. Now, at that time, I was, amongst other things, the press officer for the British UFO Research Association. And a letter, crossed my desk from a company called the Merlin Group, basically asking us if we could assist in the making of a UFO documentary. So I wrote back. This is the days before email, of course. Letters, the old-fashioned way, send a letter in the post. And, I explained what we could and couldn't do. We used to have a little information leaflet about the association. I sent that as well. And we exchanged a couple of letters and a couple of faxes, I believe, as well. And then in the end, I spoke to the gentleman who'd signed the bottom of this letter, and that was a chap by the name of Ray Santilli. And, he talked about making a sort of a general UFO documentary and, asked if we could supply video clips and that kind of thing. We couldn't, but I knew someone that could. And this went on for, a few months. And then during one of the telephone conversations, this had sort of slipped into 1994 now, Ray Santilli said, I've actually got film of the UFO crash at Roswell and, one of the creatures being autopsied. So I think the natural question from anybody would have been, well, I said, show me it. It's a great claim, but, let's have a look. So the conversation kind of went like, yes, I can, no, I can't, yes, I can, no, I can't. Anyway, I managed to meet Ray Santilli in London. I live a few hundred miles north of London, but we used to hold meetings in London. And we had an evening's presentation with Travis Walton and Mike Rogers. They were over with their partners promoting the movie Fire in the Sky. So I organised an evening presentation, and I knew Santilli's offices weren't that far away, so I invited him along. And he came along, a very nice guy, easygoing. Said he'd been out in the States in 1992 looking for old music memorabilia, the old rock and roll stars before they were famous. His business, the Merlin Group, was mainly music orientated. They licensed back catalogues from the 60s groups or re-recorded things, this kind of stuff. So he was a great memorabilia collector in his own right. And I said, it's a great story, Ray, love to hear it, but again, you need to show me the film. Yes, I can. No, I can't. Yes, I can. So in the end, I just said, look, it's another great story. It's a fantastic story. I've heard plenty of them, and I basically told him to go away. I didn't believe him. Then we kind of flip over into early 1995, and I was sent a movie for review. It was the Roswell movie made by Paul Davids. Oh, yeah. And it was being released here by Sony, but it was only a small time release. This was no big thing. We just got sent a copy for review, and I thought, Roswell, I wonder if that chap Santilli still claims to have this film. Now, Ray had given me a business card, so I pulled it out of the pile, and I rang him. And he says, yeah, I do, Philip, but you don't believe me. I said, well, I can't believe you until you show me it. So he said, okay, make an appointment with my secretary and come and see it. So I did. Me and my wife travelled to London, and in his office, in the old VHS player, Ray played as a piece of film that he called the on-site location film, or the tent footage as it got better known as. He claimed that when the creatures were first, removed from wherever in the desert, before they were shipped anywhere, they were put in a little field tent to protect them. And one of these was filmed at the time. So you had a black and white film, no soundtrack, a fixed camera, with a creature on a slab with a cover over most of it. Beyond that were two men in white coats with, it looked like you could see something shine, looked like a knife of some description, and, I'll call it a fleshy material. And a gentleman with his back to the camera walked in front of the camera every now and again. It lasts about, 8 or 10 minutes. And it's kind of what I expected to see. You could see the creature's head and the black eyes. I thought, well, it's not the greatest of quality, but then, to our surprise, Ray said, well, that's not all of it. I've got more. We're having it processed now. So over the next few weeks, we went back a number of times. And that's when he showed us what everybody knows as the alien autopsy that was shown on Fox in the US and various other channels. But what a lot of people are not aware is that Ray Santilli showed me and my wife two different autopsies. Same creature, same location, different medical procedures conducted, quite similar, but nonetheless very different. The other autopsy, for example, the film is a lot brighter. They do a different medical procedure. It doesn't go out as focus as much because the camera doesn't close in on it. And so there are two different autopsies. Only one has ever been released. I'm not the only one to have seen these. Crop Circle researcher Colin Andrews has seen them. My colleague in Italy by the name of Maurizio Beata has seen them. And I believe the late Reg Presley also saw them. But my wife was there as well. And then there's the wreckage or the debris film. There's, again, in a tent, there's these large hand panels and big, large I-beams that we were shown as well. So we now saw this. And I asked Santilli what his intentions were. He said, he made no hesitation to say, I want to commercialise it. and he wanted to release it on home video. And he said, I want you to work on this with us, Philip. You know, we're going to put a little documentary together and we're going to sell it. And I agreed to do that, but then I also said, will you show this at our conference? I was also Euphoria's conference organizer at the time. And we had this is now sort of around April time, 1995. I said, I have a conference organised in Sheffield in August, late in August. Will you show it there? And he said, yeah. So we just shook hands. There was no contract, no money involved. And of course, I worked on the documentary that Ray made himself, which he sold on VHS video. It is narrated by a famous British actor by the name of Brian Blessed. I wrote all that for him. I did various other things. And of course, the first time anyone else saw a snippet of this film was what Santilli did on May the 5th at the London Museum. Had a private screening, so it was invitation only. A lot of journalists there, a few UFO researchers. He showed it there, but the first time it was actually seen in public was at our conference in Sheffield that August. Ray put tight security on the conference because the next day the film was being shown on television around the world. So, and that, you know, when I saw it, gentlemen, that. And Ray, I knew of Ray's intentions. I thought, well, the only way we're really going to get to the bottom of this film is if we get it out into the public domain. Now, at that point, there was no television involved. There was no newspapers, no nothing. As I said, Ray's intention was to sell it on home video. Now, the story got out not long after that, quite by accident, and that was my fault. So newspapers started faxing me and phoning me trying to find Ray Santilli, and that's when the media became involved and television and so on. And I've heard people often say, you know, oh, Ray's marketing plan was fantastic. Well, you know, there was no marketing plan. I've been in his office and it was just chaos. You know, he didn't release the information about the film. It was me. And I did that by accident. So there was no great marketing plan. Once the story was out there, it took on a life of its own, as did the film itself, and it just snowballed. Because we're talking about a time when, you know, the X-Files TV show was probably at its most popular as well. So it was perfect timing. And you know, that's how the alien autopsy, you know, became known around the world in August 1995. Now, you may call me naive, and I probably was, but once it was on television around the world, I thought surely somebody will step forward and say, that's me on there, I'm one of the actors, or, you know, I filmed it, or I made the props for it, or whatever, or, no, that's my grandfather on there, he told me about this, you know, and I'd never said, whatever. But it was literally, you know, like the tumbleweed effect. Nothing. Nothing from either side. You know, UFO researchers were arguing about it, but arguing about it wasn't people coming forward. I mean, absolutely nothing. And despite Santilli's insistence that the film had been checked by Kodak and all this, it hadn't. He promised me and everyone else who asked pieces of film that we could have analysed. Now, we have Kodak here in the UK. It's in Hertfordshire. And I spoke to Kodak and they said, we will gladly analyse the film. We won't comment on what it shows, but we'll analyse the film for its age. And not far from where their offices were, there was also the British Film Institute. And they said, we'll get the BFI involved as well, free of charge. You know, no problem. Now, where Santilli lived, it was only a short drive from there. He could have literally driven up there and handed the film over the counter and watched them do it. You know, he will tell you that Kodak refused to do it. That is not true. Kodak were only more than willing to do it free of charge. We'd used Kodak before as film analysts when we got alleged UFO photos. We haven't used them a lot, I've got to be honest, but we did on occasion, and they were more than happy to look at things. It got them publicity as well, so the film wasn't checked by Kodak in any way that's reliable for authentication processes. So all we really had was the film that we saw on television. Now, when you watch the film, there is nothing on there that will say it's a fake. A lot of people thought that there's a phone on the wall with the curly flecks. They thought, they didn't have curly flecks as in 1947. Well, they did. They just came as an additional extra. You had to pay a little bit more for them, but they were there all right. Clock on the wall with, the microphone hanging down. All the medical instruments were all from that era. So then we showed the film to the medical community, surgeons, pathologists, you name it. And surprisingly, a lot of them, although they wouldn't comment on what the creature was lying on the slab, they said that the medical procedure was, pretty good. They couldn't really find a lot of fault with it. And we went to the Combat Cameraman's Association. Some of them said, if I'd have filmed that in combat, that's rubbish. Others said it's not bad, actually, because these was meant to be, the film that we have is meant to be the stuff that was left behind. What Santilli's mythological cameraman said was, I sent all the good stuff off to Washington, and I had some extra bits left behind that needed some special attention, and they never collected it, so I just kept hold of it. So they were like the outtakes, if you like, they were meant to be out of focus or dark or whatever. So the arguments raged around the world, and by this time we got the internet beginning in 1995 and email. I think it was the sort of first UFO battle that was fought online, and Santilli stuck to his story, and that's how it all took off, gentlemen.
That's good point. It took off.
Yeah, I see what you did there, Philip. So we're looking at on the video feed here the label from the film can, and I did photography in the military, although not 1947, so things have changed. What it brings up the question: where did Santilli get this film?
Well, what he
and
claims
why him?
Well, what he claims was that in 1992, he was in Cleveland, Ohio, and they'd advertised in local media that him and his business colleague were looking for old film photographs, memorabilia of rock and roll stars, Elvis, Pat Boone, whatever. Ray has a very, very large collection of music memorabilia himself. And the story goes that a gentleman stepped forward and said, I used to be a freelance cameraman and I worked for X company and I filmed Elvis as an unknown. Mm-hmm. So Ray says the company had no longer existed, therefore there was no copyright issue. We'll buy it off you and we'll pay you cash. So they claim to have bought this, early clip of Elvis. He said, well, they were packing up to go home when this gentleman came back and said, well, if you think that's good, before I was a freelance cameraman, I was in the military. And in 1947, I went to film what I was told was a downed Russian spy plane of some description. But he said, when I got there, we were near Roswell, and he said, I filmed this UFO and the crash at Roswell. Are you interested in buying this film? So he said, Ray said he took an internal flight, went to this gentleman's house. They literally put some of the film on a projector. He could see around the room, this gentleman's memorabilia from when he was in the military and so on. So again, it was a cash transaction. They shook hands on it, and the deal was that he didn't release the cameraman's identity. Ray says he didn't have the money at that time to buy it, so he came home and he set about raising the money. And when he eventually got it, the film was shipped in. So you have some of the film that is in a big canister. That's then in a box. And then there's a label stuck over some of the boxes. So Ray released, I think it was 3 or 4 photocopies of the labels that had allegedly been on the boxes. They've been flattened out. And it said, Autopsy, whatever, dates on them. Now, there was a stamp on them. There was an official stamp. But the stamp is smudged or faded. And somebody thought, we've got them here. We've got them. Because that is the crest or the stamp for the Department of Defense. Okay. Now, bearing in mind, this is supposed to have been filmed in, May, June, 1947. Somebody said the Department of Defense didn't come into force until September of 1947. Therefore, these are a fake. However, what I forgot to mention was, before it was known as the Department of Defense, it was known as the Department of War.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And all they've done is changed the lettering around the official stamp. The emblem in the middle is, I think it's an eagle with arrows in its talons or something like that. But the writing around the edge was smudged. You can't read it, so it could have been either. There was no way of telling. So and then on these labels, it tells you what type of film is used, and it was Kodak Super XX. So we contacted Kodak in the States. They went to their archives and they sent us all kinds of stuff. They were really helpful. And when it comes to 16mm black and white Super XX film, there is a table on the next page, and it gives you all the different types of film, and you go across the columns, and it tells you, what these films are to be used for. And with Super XX, one of them was indoors under subdued lighting. Now, whatever you say about the Alien Autopsy film, it was clearly indoors, and there were no lamps or anything, so it was in subdued lighting. So even that seemed to fit, Mm-hmm. And I think Ray essentially got lucky as well, because there were people saying, now, if this was the real thing, there's no way you'd be able to smuggle top secret film out of the US. Well, we have a thing here called a car boot sale. And it's basically, usually on a Sunday, you'll go and pitch a table somewhere, you'll all be there, and you sell your unwanted goods. A bit like your garage sales, but on a larger scale. Mm-hmm. Now, at the time, a gentleman had gone to one of these car boot sales. This was in the newspaper, and he bought some old VHS video cassettes, and he took them home, and he thought, well, before I tape over them, I'll have a look, see what's on them. So there were no labels on them. He put them in. And they were actually top secret films of the Special Air Services training here in the UK. So this idea that, top secret film can't get out into the open, that was dashed. And then somebody commented on the quality of the film is pretty good. And again, there was an argument of whether old film that had been stored somewhere would look so good. And again, Ray got quite lucky. Apparently an old piece of film of Winston Churchill had been found. But this was filmed on one of his visits to the United States, I believe during the Second World War. He was atop the Empire State Building. And it was so clear, was the film, it looked like it had been shot yesterday, And of course, Churchill is a national hero here. And that made the headlines as well. And they showed a clip of the film of Churchill on the news, and it was indeed, pretty much perfect. So, the stars kind of aligned for Ray Santilli in a lot of instances, and he got lucky in that respect. So that's the story behind the film, and we pressured. When I say we, me, colleagues, television, you name it, pressured Ray to tell us who this cameraman is, and he wouldn't. However, he said he'd get him to phone me. So one night I did receive a phone call from a gentleman with an American accent. Didn't say an awful lot. He would claim to be his cameraman. I can't verify he wasn't phoning me from next door, So that's how it all. That's the sort of the backstory to it.
Okay, well, we're going to take our bottom of the hour break, and you're listening to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on WOON 1240 AM and 99.5 FM in New England's beautiful Blackstone River Valley, and we'll be right back with our guest, Philip Mantle, to continue some questions about the Alien Autopsy film. Stick with us.
Get down to brass tacks at home with me, Bob Vila, and my tip of the day every day right here.
Bob Vila's Home Improvement Tip of the Day can only be heard on ON, AM, and FM every weekday at 6:50 in the morning. Bob Vila's Home Improvement Tip of the Day is brought to you by Cumberland Kitchen and Bath Design Center. Bob Vila's Home Improvement Tip of the Day on ON Radio.
We're local and live at 99.5 FM, ON, AM, and FM.
And welcome back to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on WOON. And we are talking via Skype from the UK with our good friend Philip Mantle. And he's got some inside information on the Alien Autopsy film from 25 years ago. And it's a fascinating discussion so far. He's given us the background. So let's go to some questions. Excuse me. This is a question from our good listener, certainly Peter in Bogota, Colombia, who asks some really good questions almost every week.
Alrighty, so Peter writes to us. Please ask Philip if he has seen any alien autopsy medical documents that he thinks might be real, for any case, anywhere. If so, please share what you read.
Yeah, I mean, again, one of the things that we asked Santilli was there any documentation to accompany his films, and all we have was the film canister labels. There was nothing else. There was nothing certainly from 1947, but like I said, the film was shown to a number of medical personnel in 1995 who commented on it, but there was nothing else that came with it that Ray says this was from the cameraman. He released a statement that he claimed was the cameraman's story, which we've touched on. And Ray said, I had one of my secretaries type it up, but there is no documents of any description with it at all.
Okay. I'm looking at the label here. I know Ben has a question too. It says reel number 64, July 1947, autopsy number 2, head. So, what, do we have any idea what the other 63 or 60, whatever, how many other reels?
Well, yeah, I mean, Ray originally said that he received 22 reels of film. Okay, now,
wow.
If 16 millimeter film reels are in 3-minute sections, so if you have one reel of film and you used all of it, you'd have enough film for 3 minutes. That's all. And even when I was in his office, the whole lot was there in a box next to his desk. I have a picture of it, and I'm so honest. When he left the room to go and attend to something, gentlemen, I could have taken a snip of the film, or I could, but I was just honest. It's not my property. We have no idea. What Ray claimed was that when he opened these canisters, he changed his story much later. He said that some of it had deteriorated.
Well, that would be normal.
Yeah, so it had deteriorated, and there were only bits and pieces left. So he claims that originally he said what you see on the TV is real. He then claimed some years later that it wasn't. It was a restoration. They'd used these scraps of film to restore it. But I reminded Ray that if you are restoring something, for example, gentlemen, let's assume you are. One of your talents is you're experts in paintings. You are painting restorers.
I wish.
And if I'm just saying for sake of argument, let's assume the most famous painting in the world, probably the Mona Lisa. Let's assume you were going to restore it. You wouldn't make 2 of them, would you?
No.
No, that's true.
You wouldn't have the Mona Lisa as everyone knows and loves it, and then another Mona Lisa but looking different, maybe with blonde hair,
Yeah.
Well, what Ray Santilli has forgotten, in inverted commas, is that there are 2 different autopsy films. But he only ever talks about one. That's the one you've seen on television.
Mm-hmm.
So if it was a restoration, why would you make 2? And if you made 2, then why not, release 2?
Mm.
If there were scraps of film and there were 2 autopsies filmed, 2 different ones, and you restored them both, then why not show both? As I said, the other one, to the best of my recollection, and I only ever saw it once, is a little bit longer in length. It's very bright. It doesn't go out of focus so much, but it is real. It is there. My wife's seen it, and as have Hutters. So it is there. Originally, Ray said that the other film was the ownership of it had been transferred to his business partner, which was a gentleman by the name of Volker Spielberg, who lived in Germany. Yeah, Spielberg.
Yeah, that's rather an interesting coincidence.
Yeah, it is. And he said he put the money up for the film, and he has ownership of the other autopsy, and he just wants to keep it to himself. And of course, as the years progressed, Ray changed the story to say it was a restoration, and the other film was kindly forgotten about and ignored.
Well, there seems to be a surplus in this whole process of television and film producers, including Santilli himself, and a conspicuous shortage of scientists, with the notable exception we notice of Dr. Bruce Maccabee. What does this do to the credibility of Santilli's story?
Well, I mean, there isn't any credibility to Santilli's story because,
Fair.
although we had no single piece of proof that would show it was a fake. My first indication, or what I did early on, gentlemen, was I got to sort of know Ray's character, and if you were confrontational with him, he would just ignore you. That was it. So what I decided to do, right or wrong, was in public and in his presence, I would support him. I would say, "This is great, Ray, you tell him," whatever. But behind the scenes, I was working with colleagues to try and get to the bottom of it. And I told Ray I was trying to get to the bottom of it, but he just shrugged his shoulders and smiled. And he said, "That's okay, Philip, that's no problem." And so little by little, piece by piece, we managed to glean information that eventually led to us being able to prove it a fake. First indication came from a special effects company in the States called the Really Dangerous Company. And they did what special effects people did. They actually played the film, very, very slowly and looked at it from a special effects viewpoint. And then they published a little list of things for you to watch for. And they were just tiny little indications. This wasn't proof, but it was indications that, there's something, not right here. For example, they take a saw and they saw the head open on this creature, but the head wobbles, and you actually see the sort of doctor's assistant put his hand on it to keep it still. And the reason it wobbles is because it's not attached to any spinal cord. There is no spine down it. And again, when you look at the creature lying on the slab, it's rounded. But when a person dies and are laid in that position, gravity takes over and all your bodily fluids all drop to the lowest point, and you are left basically with a flat underside of a corpse. So your back is flat, your buttocks are flat, and so on. But this thing isn't. It's still rigid, as if it's stood up. So it's an indication that there's something not right there. It's not proof, but it was an indication there was something not right.
Mm-hmm.
So I just kept at it, really.
Yeah.
I think that's actually a really, really interesting sort of thing. Being a former film student, it's looking at the film, because it is strange, right? But I guess if this is an alien creature, then one would assume it wouldn't have the same anatomy that we do. It happens to be bipedal, but perhaps, the sort of biological needs of a completely alien creature probably wouldn't be the same as a human. I mean, that would be a counter argument, circumstantial, but yeah.
Absolutely, and it was a counter argument. But when they cut the thing open, it bleeds, and the blood flows down. Gravity takes over. So in that respect, it acted the very same as would if you cut one of us open. The blood would come out, and gravity would take over. It would flow downwards, not up. So that was indeed a counter argument, but it's not one that held a great deal of water, because, like I said, when they cut it open, we'll call it blood, but its bodily fluids did flow downwards like anyone else's. It looks pretty much like us. One of the curious things that a lot of people concentrated on was the fact that it had 6 fingers on its hands and toes. It was polydactyly, as it's known. Just so happens I worked with a gentleman who was polydactyly. Usually if you have extra digits, it's normally on either your hands or your feet. It's rarely is it both. My friend who I worked with, he had 6 toes on each foot. And we used to call him the man from Atlantis, because they were webbed as well, and when his son was born, his son had 6 toes on each foot. But what they do nowadays, they just, while you're an infant, they just take the extra digit off. It's usually the small one. It's an extra one. But of course, then we looked at polydactylism, and it goes off in all directions. I mean, strange as it is, just last year, my wife and I were at a large country house here in the UK. Huge, great thing. And we go up one particular staircase, and there's a well-known portrait of one of its former owners, and she sat there in all her glory, looking magnificent, lady somebody or other. And one of the guys is telling us all about it, and I just looked at this painting, and I'm looking at it, and she had 6 fingers on each hand, and the guy who worked there for years had never noticed. So, yeah, she had 6 fingers on each hand on this portrait. She sat with her hands crossed, in a nice posture, but she got 6 fingers on each hand. He looked at me as if to say, how did he notice that? I'm the expert on the house and the paintings, but anyway, that's just the way it goes. So, the research went on into pretty much everything you could just see in the film. Was the medical procedure correct? Were the instruments correct? And there was nothing that could prove it real. Similarly, there was nothing that at the time could prove it, a fake. So the argument then rumbled on and kept on going.
So this is actually a really interesting sort of indicator, I guess, of sort of a cultural reaction to something that you can't definitively prove or disprove. And I wanted to go back to a point you made earlier in the show, which was, when the documentary was released, no one said anything, and no one did anything. Now, that there's this whole disclosure movement that's been going on for a while now, and if it makes any headway, and let's say, world governments do say, well, we can definitively say that, extraterrestrials do exist, do you think the reaction would be the same?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, it's one I've discussed with colleagues previously. I said, first of all, who would you, let's assume that it's going to be announced, who would you trust to announce it in the first place?
Yeah. Why don't we take a minute here, because there are more questions, but Philip, why don't we take a minute here to talk about your work, the books you've been publishing, and you're very successful at it, your own book, the Roswell Alien Autopsy book, and your website where people can find out more, etc.
Yeah, I mean, a few years back I published my research on the alien autopsy film. It's called Roswell Alien Autopsy. But of course it didn't stop there just because the book was out. So what I decided to do, because it's coming up to the 25th anniversary, a lot of the work we did in the early days was done in paper format. I literally have a filing cabinet, an old-fashioned filing cabinet right next to me, and all my paperwork is in there. So I expanded on the original book. I did a revised edition, and for the first time I used a lot of the documents that were gathering dust in my filing cabinet. You know, I think there's even an early fax in there from 1993 from Ray Santilli discussing the documentary and another idea that I discussed with him about a different documentary, you know. So it's called Roswell Alien Autopsy. It's 8 by 10 inches. I think it's, I don't know, 500 pages. So not only do you read the accounts of the research as it goes the way through, you can see the documents that go with it. And of course, you know, I've interviewed just about anybody and everybody, and you summarise the interviews, but I originally transcribed them, so I thought I'll put the whole transcripts in this book, and you can read every word that was said. You don't have to take my word for it. Mm-hmm. So it's all in there. And I published this under my little business called Flying Disc Press. I started that in 2015, and that's just, you know, my own work, but we have a number of other, you know, books from around the world.
Yeah, and many of the authors have been guests on this show, and very good ones. So we have anyone who is watching the video edition of the show. We can see the figure lying on the slab as well as the book cover and the head of the figure. One of the things that strikes me, Philip, and this sort of has a two-sided question. I always thought, and I first saw this in 1995 when it came out. Ben was 3, and the figure does not look all that alien to me. Mm-hmm. You know, and on the other hand, the other side of the question is that, you know, regardless of the number of fingers and toes, if this is an alien from some other planet, any planet with similar conditions, particularly gravitational conditions, conditions similar to what we have here, more or less, would evolve, one would think, in a similar way to ourselves. Maybe 2 legs, 2 arms, a head, 2, perhaps there might be 3, I don't know. But I mean, it's just because of the gravitational particular situation, you'd have a figure that might not look really all that different. So what say you? I mean, this is... if this really is an alien, which I think all of us kind of doubt, why doesn't it look more alien? Well, it's a good question. I'll skip forward in time. In 2006, Santilli took part in making a movie called Alien Autopsy. And that's where his story changed, and he talked about a restoration and the film being damaged and so on. Not long after that, now we've been digging away, trying to get to the bottom of this. A couple of years earlier, I'd been approached by a chap, and I met him, and I'd written an article for a magazine, and he'd seen the magazine article because it was on sale in the public domain. And he said, anybody still interested in this film? He says, yeah. He says, well, the reason I'm contacting you is that my friend made the dummies. Now, again, the story goes, well, who? Now, he wouldn't tell me to begin with. He was sort of representing his friend to see if there was any television interest in it. So I put him in touch with the producer who had made Alien Autopsy, Fact or Fiction. It's a gentleman by the name of Bob Kiviat. So he spoke to Bob, but during our conversation, he dropped a couple of hints about some of the work his friend had done before. And we managed to find him. I think he just talked a little bit too much. So we found this gentleman. Now, bearing in mind, from a hoax point of view, we'd gone round just about every special effects expert in the UK that we could lay our hands on, and none of them had a clue. I'd speak to one and they'd say, it's not me, but it looks like it might be so-and-so's work.
I'd phone so-and-so and he'd say exactly the same. So we went round and round in circles. However, we'd actually been looking in the wrong area. The gentleman that cropped up was a chap by the name of John Humphreys. Now, yes, John had occasionally worked, in the film and television industry, but by profession, he wasn't a special effects artist. He was actually a sculptor, and he was trained at the Royal Academy. So, we tried to contact John. He wouldn't return our calls. However, he did speak to Bob Kivier, and during the conversations, he kind of said, yeah, well, he admitted to what he'd done to an extent. But he says, the gentleman you need to speak to is Spiros. Now, that's all he said, with no second name. Why Bob didn't push him for a second name, I don't know. And then all of a sudden, he sort of disappeared, because he was then signed up, believe it or not, to make the dummies for the movie that was being made. And the way I found out about that, I contacted one of the executives at the film company. It's been made here in the UK. And I didn't really ask any questions, I just kind of went around and round in circles. And then I just dropped a little question one day. It's an old trick, it doesn't always work. And I said, oh, by the way, who's doing your special effects for you? And she says, it's John Humphreys. He's making the dummies for us, and he made them for Ray Santilli. So that kind of confirmed it. So we've been given this name of Spiros. It meant nothing to nobody, And then in 2006, a colleague of mine by the name of Russell Callahan had made a little DVD about the alien autopsy, and it was online. And a chap phoned him, claiming to be the man behind it all, the mastermind, the designer, etc. So Russell, said, well, it's not me you need to speak to, really, it's Philip. And this gentleman was called Spiros Milaris. It's a Greek name. Spiros rang me. We spoke for at least an hour, if not more, which I recorded every word of it. And as soon as he started speaking, he filled in all the gaps. All the unanswered questions were gone. I arranged to call him back at a later date and do a more formal interview, which I did. And it's just by coincidence, I was rooting through some material the other day, and I've got two old cassette tapes, and that's my interview with Spiros Milaris. That's how long it took. It filled up two cassette tapes, and I transcribed all that, and that's all in the book. Now, Spiros, his background is his parents are from Greek. He was born here. As a young man, he was trained as a mechanic, but he had two loves. One was film, the other was magic. And so he trained in both. He became a magician and a filmmaker.
Yeah, just like Lumiere.
Yeah, he was a magician and a filmmaker. And in 1995, he had his own crew, was doing pop videos, promos, he's a camera crew for hire. And there's a television festival in France every year, and he was going to that. And he had a trade book with all different companies in it. And he just faxed a few. And said, look, we're going to be out at the TV festival. We have some spare time. If you're looking to hire a film crew, we're available. And it was just by coincidence that one of those was Ray Santilli's office. He met Ray Santilli out in France. Ray told him, this story about the film, this cameraman, etc., etc. When they got back, Spiros went to see Ray. He put the film in the VHS player, which again at this point was the tent footage, because that's all he had at this point. Spiros says that's never seen film, that's been shot on video. So Ray cried foul that he bought this film in good faith, and so Spiros took off, and as he's driving away, he thought, I could make this I could make some alien autopsy film, and I have just the man to make it with. My friend, John Humphreys. Spiros and John were good friends, you know. I believe Spiros was like, you know, godfather to one of his children and so on. So he got in touch with John. They went back to Santilli and said, you know, we can make it. And they got a budget, and they designed it, planned it, made it, did it. And the reason there is 2 autopsies, I'm cutting a long story very short, is that the first
we're almost out of time.
Yeah, the first one, they made a mistake on it. So they made another model overnight, and that's the one you see on the television.
Oh.
There was even an error with that. There's a big hole in the leg. There was an air pocket. So they literally improvised. They went and got some bones from the butchers, stuck them in, and burnt the leg. Then it looked like it had been in an accident. That's the one you see on the TV. The other one has The other one, had it been released, you would have been able to say that's a fake.
Well, there we are.
There you go.
All right. Well, that's the story. Philip, thank you for a very interesting show here, and we have to go, but we refer people to your website via ours, where we'll have a link, and we'll talk to you soon.
That's great. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Oh, thanks for being on.
Okay. So, take it away, Ben. Or
well, you see, so on April 3rd, 4th, and 5th, we are actually going to be at the New England Parafest in Kittery, Maine. The first 2 days of this event, Friday and Saturday, will be at the Community Center at 120 Rogers Road for Sunday the 5th, and we move to the Lions Club on that's on 117 State Road for the rest of the event, which will include a live broadcast of the show between noon and 1 p.m. All proceeds from this event will go to help support the historic Hilldale Cemetery in Haverhill, Massachusetts, and toward the upkeep of veterans' gravesites there.
And you can check out you can get tickets, etc., and find out information at EssexCountyGhostProject.com. Okay. Along with ourselves, speakers, almost all of whom you've heard on the show here, will include our favorite co-host, Shane Searway, Bill Brock of the Discovery Channel's Monsters Underground, Ancient Sites expert Dennis Stone, Bigfoot hunter Dave McCulloch, and reincarnation researcher Stephen Sakalarius, researcher and broadcaster Tim Weisberg, and many more people. And again, order tickets at EssexCountyGhostProject.org.
And naturally, we'll be back at the Exeter UFO Festival. That's on Labor Day weekend, September 5th and 6th, as speakers, and to do our 5th annual live broadcast from the historic Exeter Town Hall on Sunday the 6th at noon. The event is sponsored by the Exeter Area Kiwanis Club to raise funds for local children's charities.
Okay, I think we better skip to our coming attractions, Ben.
Indeed. So, hold on. Allow me to get to the exact page. So next Sunday, March 1st, will be the UFOs and Time Travelers show with Diane Tessman.
So we'll leave you this afternoon with a thought from American author Tony Robbins. It is your decisions, not your conditions, that determine your destiny.
We still have a few seconds.
Okay, I always 12 years on the air, you think I'd get this right.
Well, time is relative, as they say.
Well, extremely so, yes. So there we have it. I mean, I think that's a very interesting quote and a very interesting guest. I took the wind out of the sails of the alien autopsy film, certainly. So there we go. Anyway, I'm Paul Eno.
And I'm Ben Eno. And thanks for joining us on our great cosmic journey, and we shall see you next time on Behind the Paranormal.
Return to this radio frequency 167 hours from now for another edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.